Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Neurodiverging podcast. My name is Danielle Sullivan, and I am your host. I'm very happy to be back today. Today, we're talking about something I hope you'll find very interesting indeed, which is how to become an advocate, how to decide what kind of advocate you primarily want to be, and recognizing advocacy when you see it. This is, I think, a very important and maybe not talked enough about piece of learning how to be a neurodivergent person in the world, and also something I talk about with people who are parenting a lot. How do we support our neurodivergent children and youth in the world? I think this is also important if you're not a parent too, though, because presumably you have family, friends, other social connections, partners, etc., jobs. And at some point, you will probably need to talk about your needs and be able to advocate for your needs in order to access things you need to access, whether that's a formal request in a job situation, but all the way down to, hey, partner, I love you. I need my alone time, right? In a way that is clear but kind. And in order to be able to do that, we need to have certain skills and learn advocacy work. And so today I want to go through three different stages of becoming an advocate that many of us are working our way through. And this is one of those things where even once we get to third stage advocacy, we are still working on stages 1 and 2. We never finish with them. We are always learning how to do more and better as social justice workers, as self advocates, and as advocates for change throughout the world or throughout our communities. Before I dive into this more specifically, I just want to stop, take a breath, and thank my patrons at patreon.com/neurodiverging. Patrons throw a couple of bucks in the pot every single month, and in return, get some ad-free podcast episodes, monthly social meetings, monthly game meetings, monthly parenting meetings, twice a week accountability, body doubling support meetings, and lots more. If you're interested, you can learn more at patreon.com/neurodiverging. And if you're not interested, please still feel free to go check out neurodiverging.com, which is the podcast homepage. You can find past episodes, transcripts, amazing articles written by myself and our team of writers. All of us are actually neurodivergent people, so we appreciate your support and your traffic. Okay, let's talk about advocacy. So advocating for ourselves just means standing up for ourselves, right? That voc part of advocacy is your voice, your vocalness, your ability to communicate your needs, your wants, your desires to other people. And of course, just because the root word comes from vocal doesn't mean this is only done by speaking, right? We can advocate for ourselves in lots of different ways. There are three sort of tiers of advocacy, and I think laying these out for people, especially if you're sort of in the beginning of your journey, well, wherever you are in your journey, really, because sometimes I think about this and I'm like, oh, duh, I'm so glad I thought of this. But especially if you're a new advocate, maybe you're newly identified, maybe your child is newly identified, maybe your partner is newly identified, and you're trying to sort of figure out where do you want to fit? Where do you feel safe? Where do you not feel safe? Where are you willing to be vulnerable? All of these questions come up as part of us trying to figure out, where can I advocate for myself to get more of my needs met so that I have more capacity as an individual, as a community member, as a member of the larger world, right? So I think it's important to have a sense of these tiers. You don't have to locate yourself highly specifically in them, and you can move. They are dynamic tiers. You can move among and between and all through them at all different parts of your life. Sometimes you'll be doing all three of them at once, but I think it's good to like lay them out specifically so that you can kind of locate yourself and locate others and it can help you understand what's going on a little bit better. So the first tier that many of us are dealing with, especially right when we're newly identified or our person that we love is newly identified, is the self-advocate. Being a self-advocate means advocating, standing up for your needs as an individual human person in an individual human body. Part of this is knowing your rights, right? Many of our rights are not upheld. We still have them. We still deserve them. We still often want to push for them. I would argue that even if you're in a place where you might be punished for advocating for your rights, it's still helpful to know them, because even if your work situation or your school or whatever is not going to uphold your rights and is going to fight you on them, you should know that you are a worthy person and their denial of your rights is not your fault or a reflection of you as an individual, right? That is them denying you your rights. So it's important to know what your rights are. It's important when you can, and it is safe-ish to speak up for yourself, to make your own decisions, to have the information you need to make your own decisions, and to have support in making your own decisions for yourself. Okay. We especially see this when, like I said, like children and youth start to stand up for themselves as part of that self-development as they age, right? Maybe from older childhood and into young adulthood and all the way up through adulthood. But this also happens in a different way when we are originally identified, whether you're self-identifying or professionally identified. Once you give yourself that label, that category, that framing of being a neurodivergent human, then we start to look at ourselves and our needs from a different lens. And in many ways, it's kind of like a re envisioning of ourselves as adults, a re understanding of what our needs actually are when they may have been suppressed for a very long time. And so, for many people who are coming into this diagnosis, regardless of age, self advocacy is the place they start. They say, where is it safe for me to stand up for my needs? If it's not safe to stand up for my needs, do I decide to mask and kind of push down my authentic self and maybe suffer negative mental health consequences for that? Or do I decide within whatever autonomy I have to make decisions to move myself away from these places where I cannot be my authentic self, right? And this is complicated stuff. So I'm aware I'm being very like abrupt with it, right? All of these decisions are highly dependent on your culture, your race, your access to healthcare, mental health care providers who understand you, family members who are supportive, et cetera, and so forth and so on, right? And so these decisions are different for every single human. Okay. So that's self-advocacy. It starts with one single human. Okay. The same way we talk about self-care, starting with one single human, and part of self-advocacy, I would argue, is self-care. Okay. Our second tier then spreads out to individual advocacy. And this is usually considered to be, I would say, on our way to kind of community, self-care to community care. This is kind of in the middle. Individual advocacy can be the same as self-advocacy, but can also be kind of distinct. It just depends. Individual advocacy is when we are helping to solve a problem and advocating for one other person. This can be when a parent supports a child, when a spouse supports another spouse, when a friend supports a friend, whatever it is. And in this case, our goal as advocates is to raise the voice and the needs of the other human, not to step over them, not to talk on top of them, but to help them get their voice heard more directly and more clearly. We are helping prioritize someone else's needs to get met. This is in most cases very similar to allyship, whether you are a anti-racist ally, a queer ally, right? Your job, my job as a, say, anti-racist ally, is not to speak over Black people and not to tell other people what I think Black people need, but to listen to Black people and to like use my privilege to get in the room and then put their voices first, right? As a queer person, when I'm looking and trying to assess, is someone a queer ally or someone maybe going to harm me, I'm trying to see, do they leave space for queer voices? And especially for marginalized queer voices, or are they speaking over us and trying to decide what would be best for us, right? Remember, I'm not sure what order these episodes are coming out, but if you've already seen my episode on ableism and competency and the understanding of competency, right? Part of individual advocacy is recognizing that all humans, regardless of intelligence, regardless of education, regardless of skill level, are competent to speak on their needs, their desires, their goals, their values. Or again, speaking meaning communicating. I'm sorry, I keep saying speaking. I will work on that. All humans have the ability to communicate their desires and needs. Some of us more clearly, specifically, concretely, and some of us less so, but it is there. All humans communicate in some way. And so the goal here is, as an individual advocate, to support others communicating their own needs to other people, supporting others getting their rights as human beings recognized, okay? Now, individual advocacy is sometimes, I sort of frame it as the second tier of self advocacy. Because for me, as a neurodivergent person, I had to learn to self advocate before I had the skills I needed to advocate well for my children or for other people. Okay. Some people obviously will start as individual advocates. If you listen to this and you are a neurotypical human who has neurodivergent children, a neurodivergent spouse, etc., and so forth, right? You might be an individual advocate. In this case, your job is not to tell your child, I would argue, is not to tell your child or tell your spouse or partner what they should do or what their path is to getting their rights acknowledged, but to help them understand what their rights are, to help them learn to speak up for themselves, and to help them make their own decisions, right? One of the really nice ways we can do that, especially if you're a parent, is like teach your children what children's rights are, right? Childism is a form of bias against children that is pervasive in our country and around the world. This idea that children are less worthy humans than adults, right? Children are the same as us. They're equally important humans. They have less experience than adults, but they're otherwise highly competent and capable. If you're a parent listening to this, you need to know that your children are worthy individuals with their own values, their own needs, their own desires, right? Some of those are outside of their scope of rights, of human rights, right? And some of them are within them. Rights for autonomy, rights to make decisions about our own care, rights to food and shelter and education, right? Children might have opinions about those, might need support accessing those. And this is where somebody as an individual advocate can step up, especially if you are less marginalized than the person you are advocating for. Again, your job is not to speak for them unless they ask you to, but to use your privilege to give them more space to speak. Okay. Okay. Third group tier framing, systems change advocacy. Okay. This is, I would say, I put this last because I think you need to know self-advocacy and you need some practice performing individual advocacy with other people before you should jump into systems change advocacy. And this is just because, I mean, if you have an amazing idea for this, just go for it. Like, I'm not going to stop you. But there is a lot of nuance to these and a lot of learning that happens through our practice in advocating. We will all make a million mistakes in practicing this stuff. And that is fine, and that is normal, and that is how we learn. But we also, I would say it is often better to make a mistake when you are self-advocating or when you're advocating for somebody else than when you're advocating for systems change, because systems change, mistakes affect so many humans. We do not want errors at that level. There will already be so many errors at that level. It's complex stuff. You should do it though, but practice other stuff first. That's all I'll say. Don't be scared of it, but also practice other stuff first. Okay. Systems change advocacy is what it sounds like. There's a problem in the systems of the world that impact more than one person, usually impact groups of people based on something like race, something like sexuality, something like age, something like ethnicity, language, religion, creed, all of these kinds of sex. Did I say sex? All of these different kinds of groups that we have going, right? So when there is a law that impacts women disproportionately over men, that is a systemic problem. When there is a practice in school that impacts disabled kids more than able-bodied kids, that is a systemic problem, right? So systemic change advocacy or systems change advocacy is advocacy that we do usually as groups, but sometimes as one person to change something in the system to further equity. You'll notice that many of our podcast guests are either self-advocates or individual advocates. We have had a couple systems advocates though. One who comes to mind is Suzanne Damali, sorry, Suzanne, who advocated for a change in policy at the school, the higher ed level, to get microphones into classrooms for kids with auditory processing issues, right? That's an example of systems advocacy. It sounds like it should be an easy fix. It wasn't. Suzanne persisted and made a change that affected millions of children positively. We recently had Charlie Ocean on. Charlie is a queer rights activist and sexuality educator activist whose work is teaching tons of people all the things that they need to know to start to self-advocate and systems advocate within their companies. This kind of work stretches across the web of humanity and gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Suzanne and Charlie are, I'm sorry to picking you both out if you're listening to this, but not for anything negative, but they're really good examples of the variety of systems advocacy we can do, right? Charlie educates, teaches people about things they might need to know. And those people then go, hopefully, and educate others and talk to others and educate, and those educate more and those educate more, and it spreads out, right? Suzanne, on the other hand, saw a problem in one location, her son's classroom, talked to the leadership, who then talked to the leadership and then talked to the leadership and then talked to the leadership. And eventually she's talking with the head of, the nationwide PTA, trying to get this thing fixed. So in both cases, Charlie's kind of going from a bottom up approach, and Suzanne ended up going from the top down approach of getting a law put in place, right? Or a policy put in place that then diffuses down. Both of these models, whether it's bottom up or top down, are important to systems advocacy. And I would argue that there's not a better, that we need all models, right? The work Neurodiverging does, working with individual people via coaching, right? We teach, hopefully, individual advocacy and self-advocacy with the idea that as our clients learn these skills, that they can teach their people those skills. And so we're kind of a bottom-up model. So if you are somebody who is working on self-advocacy, or maybe working on individual advocacy, or maybe both, if you are interested in systems level advocacy, you don't have to fix one thing way at the top. Many of us could think of 100 things we change, 1,000 things we change like that in the world. Things that deprive us of the joy and the ease and the comfort that we should have, the connection and community that we should have as humans. We have enough resources, right? They're just not equitably applied to all humans. So most of us can think of things that could be better, right? We have a lot of power in this world to make change. Often we are taught that we are disempowered, and we are made to feel disempowered. And in many ways we are disempowered, but together we can make a lot of change. And just look at the list of neurodiverging podcast guests who've done something, right? Whether you're like me and Charlie and you're trying to educate, whether you're like Suzanne and you got a nationwide policy changed, whether you're like Jake Dudinsky, who made a kink-friendly space in lots of towns just for neurodivergent people to make their lives better, whether you're Christine, who wrote an article in the newspaper about her experience as a late identified autistic woman, and it touched so many people and made them think and realize, right? Whatever you do, even if it feels small, the fact is we are a communal species. Your actions touch other people. In many ways, you are going to advocate whether you mean to or not. By acting in the world, we teach people how we want to be treated. We teach people what we expect. When we uphold our own human rights, when we are stubborn about them, and when we push to have the human rights of everyone around us upheld, we change people's perspective of their empowerment. We change the world. Okay? So no matter where you are on this advocacy spectrum, even if you have no energy right now, even if you are just taking care of yourself, that is empowerment, my friend. That is recognizing that you are worthy of being here. You are a human on this planet. You have inherent worth. And you are advocating for yourself. You are showing other people how it's done. That modeling is, in my perspective, how we change the world. Okay, I hope this episode on advocacy was helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment, like, subscribe, leave a podcast review. We so appreciate all of it. If you're interested in talking more about this episode with me and other members of the Patreon, come on and join us at patreon.com/neurodiverging. It starts at $3 a month, US, and we'd love to have you there. You can also find more resources at neurodiverging.com. Thanks so much for being here today. Please remember, we are all in this together.